Love for nature. Contacts with living nature are essential for spiritual growth. Retreats to the forest or to other natural landscapes are one of the important ways of exposing oneself to God so that He can teach us more effectively. In forests, seek my instructions. This is where one can expand oneself as a consciousness over the harmony of the environment, in contrast to sitting in the head chakras while living in the city, feeding oneself with information about people's earthly desires and getting polluted by energies of their negative emotions. Although cities, being big cultural centers, are also necessary, there are libraries as well as other excellent opportunities for intellectual development. It is also easier to find like-minded people and partners on the spiritual path there. It is also beneficial to expose the body to sunlight, especially in the morning, when the sunlight is particularly tender. This light exists not only on the material plane, but also penetrates the subtlest dimensions inside our multidimensional organisms, reviving them, filling them with its pure power. It is good for people who live at high latitudes to have an artificial sun, a quartz lamp, and to have sun baths at home. This is also a wonderful remedy for various diseases. For example, exposure to ultraviolet radiation can easily cure catarrhal infections if performed right after appearing of their first symptoms. Light burns on the chest and the back made with a quartz lamp, where mustard plasters are usually applied. Make a cough go away quickly. Summer and autumn is the time for collecting and storing mushrooms and wild berries, which are very important components of pure nutrition. Any time of the year, meditations can be performed at special places of power, zones that have a significant energy impact on human beings. They are very different and can be used depending on this for healing oneself, for talking to God, for refining the consciousness, for increasing personal psychoenergetic power, or for dissolving oneself in God and merging with Him. Early spring morning is the time when nature confers on us the greatest harmony and bliss, when birds start singing even before dawn, and the entire space around us gets saturated with the energy of their love. Attuning to their state allows us to get closer to God and constitutes attainment of a certain level of refinement of the consciousness. Those who like to sleep until late have much fewer opportunities for spiritual advancement. Sunset time in spring also provides a wide variety of the subtlest impressions. During this time, the singing of birds gets superimposed against the background of sublime silence, harmony. The energy of the consciousness spills out from the body by itself and expands over the forest saturated with bliss, filling it and merging with it. In this way, the consciousness becomes more mobile, more fluid, and established in harmony and inner purity. But at any other time of the year, a morning or an evening spent in the forest or by the water reminds us of the spring dawn or dusk times. They are very important for those who have learned to deeply feel the beauty of spring. Nature also consists of a multitude of living beings, animals, plants, which, as a rule, are more refined as a consciousness and enjoy incomparably greater inner peace than most people. An average modern person has to come a long way in order to attain their level of love and peace, and has a right to say that he or she started to develop spiritually. Moreover, only in open natural landscapes, in contrast to boxes of city apartments and corridors of streets, is it possible to expand, to open wide the refined consciousness in order to literally grow its size. Let me repeat that emotions are states of the consciousness, and the consciousness is what we are. Depending on what states of the consciousness we experience, we can be closer or further from the Creator. God, in the aspect of the Creator, is the highest degree of refinement of the energy of the consciousness. It is clear to us now which direction we should move regarding development of our emotional sphere. Very few people have witnessed what is going on at a display ground of black grouses in spring, when pre-dawn mist gets filled with loud, ecstatic singing of these big, beautiful, and passionate birds. But the majority of those who have been there were cutting short those beautiful songs of love with gunshots, pain, blood, and death, and enjoyed themselves with voluptuousness of sadist murderers, raised in the tradition of having a right to kill animals, not having absolute inner taboo against inflicting any suffering on other living beings. Atheists, as well as members of mass sects in our country, easily switch to mass killings of people. In spring evenings, after the sunset, when twilight is enveloping the forest, male woodcocks fly smoothly over glades, forest openings, and lake shores overgrown with shrubs, their song consisting of beautiful, soul-touching, tender grunting, sends to us waves of love, emotions of these lovely birds. In the shrubs, over which the males fly, sit female woodcocks, choosing the one who sings the best. Here, this one, she flashes to show herself to him. He rushes after her, seized by passion of bird's love, and then they spend the night together. In the morning, they fly apart, having become tired of each other, to look for new adventures and new friends the next sunset. The mysterious beauty of Big Curlew's song, wafting to our ears from the nearest swamp, celestial bleat of a snipe, performing courtship ritual high in the sky with vibrating tail feathers, songs of robins and thrushes, all night rumbling of frogs in puddles, flashing of spawning fish in the reeds, smell of a fire, swimming in a forest lake with the first rays of the sun, and then puffs of steam coming from wet and blissful naked bodies, exaltation of souls exploding from overflowing with joy of love for God and for every living creature. This is the emotional base that God wants us to have, so that we could develop faster and more effectively in His direction. Plants are living beings too. Souls live in their bodies like we do in ours. Usually, These are the souls of vegetative, i.e., rudimentary stage of development. Although I know several human trees which are quite developed, large and strong human souls, but those people did not attain the required degree of peace during their past incarnations, and God, in order to help them become better, embodied them into trees so that they could calm down, become quiet after several hundred years of living as a plant. It is easy to communicate with such people trees on the emotional and even on the mental level. They get strongly attached to people who are capable of understanding them. They feel sad if no one visits them for a long time. When someone comes to see them, these plants meet them with joy, which is mixed with pain sometimes. What is peace then? Doing nothing? Living a lazy life? A sleepy inertia? No. Peace is the absence of emotional agitation and restless thoughts. It is possible to perform physical, mental, or meditative work fast and for a long time while experiencing inner peace. It goes hand in hand with an energetic way of living. Maintaining inner peace allows one not to waste the energy in vain. Every kind of activity performed with inner peace as a background is done more efficiently. But what is most important is that it allows one to maintain contact with God, to be guided by Him, and thus to avoid making many mistakes. In other words, it is conducive for positive evolution of man. But restlessness results in increase of one's isolation from God and in growth of the lower self. This is a drag on progress. All ordinary plants are capable of perceiving human emotions. This was proven by many scientists of various countries, which discovered changes of electric parameters of plants in response to emotions of people. Once, long after I switched to the cruelty-free diet, I was working in a forestry on sanitary thinning out of woods. In the beginning of my work, I thought about it as of something useful in general, and even enjoyed cutting superfluous trees so that the rest of them had more space for living. But at some point, when I attained greater sensitivity, feeling the pain of those creatures being cut down by my axe became unbearable to me, and I quit this job promptly. Sure, we cannot live without eating plants. We inevitably use our bodies, their bodies in construction and as firewood. And it does not make sense to wait until a tree grows old, falls down, and starts to decay. This is why it is mature trees that are cut down. But one must not kill plants unnecessarily, or thrust a knife or an axe into a tree just for fun, or cut green branches without absolute necessity, or mechanically pluck and throw down leaves from trees, grass blades, or flowers. Disrespectful attitude towards food is equally inadmissible, since food was made of bodies of living beings that died for our sake. Throwing out food, even when one eats only plants, is also a sin. It is a sin of unnecessary killing. The absolutely absurd, from an ethical standpoint, are those ritual killings of millions of fir trees and pine trees before Christmas and New Year, as well as picking flowers in order to put them in a vase and then admire their dying. It is important that the reader does not start trying to remember now. This is allowed, and that is not. What is important is not to learn by heart certain rules, but to realize and accept the ethical principles of compassion for the other's pain and respect for others' lives. And those who do not understand or accept this should not resent their own pain. Through our pain, God teaches us to understand the essence of the pain phenomenon, how unpleasant this sensation really is. In this way, He teaches us to spare others and not to hurt them unnecessarily. And even to a greater extent than to plants, this principle of compassion must be applied to animals, since they can feel pain incomparably more acutely than plants. The necessity of total adherence to the principle of compassion, in application to nutrition in particular, has been taught by God. God is love. If we want to get closer to God, we have to totally accept the principle of love. But what is love without compassion? Only a parody of it. Let us realize that however persistently pastors of various sects teach us the opposite, we will not be able to make any progress in our spiritual development without total acceptance of the compassion principle and resolved switching to killing-free diet, i.e. the one that excludes bodies of animals, mammals, birds, fish, and so on ethical rather than egotistic, for the sake of improving the personal health, for instance, motives. One can learn ethical lessons regarding plants, not only in the field of nutrition. Tent pegs can be made not only out of green plants, but also out of dry sticks that are still strong. And a fire can be made on the place of an old fire, or on a trail, etc., and not right on green plants. Another thing, a fire must not be made on dry peat. Huge areas of forest can get burned out. Thousands of plants and many animals will die in the fire. Also, during dry periods, a fire should not be made under tall spruces. Thick, perennial layer of fallen needles will smolder. The roots of the tree and surrounding plants will get burned as a result. One must be extremely careful during spring, when last year's grass catches fire very easily. When it happens, a lot of green plants, insects, birds' nests with eggs or fledglings, as well as seeds, get burned and die. And a great mass of the old grass that could serve as a natural fertilizer and enrich the soil is also wasted in the fire. Also, it looks like a wildly immoral act when someone intentionally, for fun, sets this old grass on fire, which very often becomes the cause of destruction of haystacks, houses, and other constructions. In some temples, people sing, trying to convince God that He is forbearing and merciful. But would it not be better if they gave up this useless occupation and started living in accordance with God's principle of love themselves? But this is impossible without compassion for all people and every living creature, including ants, worms, plants, and many others. God is love. Jesus Christ gave us this highest formula, the key to recognition of God. But why are there so few people who, considering themselves Christians, make use of this truth for their spiritual advancement? Why didn't this formula inspire masses of materialists to accept faith? One of the reasons for this is that the distortion of the teachings of Jesus Christ began as early as when the New Testament was compiled, which took place just several centuries after Jesus' incarnation on the earth ended. His teachings were deprived of the part where Jesus talked of man as of an evolving consciousness whose goal of development is attaining a godlike state and then merging with God the Father. The description of God the Father was also taken out of his sermons, but they included irritated demands of Paul regarding what one should and should not wear, as well as which hairstyle is appropriate. Also the Apocalypse, devoid of love and common sense, overflowing with threats of seas of blood and bowls of pus. This is not only an opinion of the author of this book, the attitude of Jesus is the same. The result of this distortion of the teachings of Jesus Christ was that the mass movement called Christianity, almost from its very beginning, ceased to be a religion of love, the love that God sent Jesus Christ to establish. We can recall the Inquisition, wars between the Orthodox and Catholics, and Crusades. In Russia, we saw mass persecution of old believers, pogroms of Jews. Outstanding Russian people, Alexander Pushkin, Leo Tolstoy, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Vladimir Vysotsky, and many others, although they acknowledged the existence of God, did not accept Christianity in this form. Questions got raised also by simple people to which the Church could not give clear and perspicuous answers. How can one assert that God is love if he promised these things in the Apocalypse? If what we see around us are wars, violence, cruelty, diseases, and suffering? No. If he is omnipotent and these things happen, if everything that surrounds us is evil, if I do not see any love anywhere, however I ask him for it, then there is something wrong about this kind of faith. And I do not need a God like this. It is important for us to realize that the fathomless abyss that appeared between the masses of Christians and God, and that isolated people from him, and that opposed God to them, making them beg various mercies from him, instead of inspiring them to change themselves in accordance with his will, and merge with him in love. This abyss has not been created by him, but by people who walked his teachings. In reality, God is not somewhere far and high in the sky, but, as Jesus said, the distance between the abode of the Creator and every one of us is not greater than the thickness of finest paper. But in order to travel such a small distance to his embrace of love, we have to become pure love, like him, rather than anger, fear, or selfish desire. Emotions are states of the consciousness. This is a fundamentally important thing to realize. We are consciousnesses, the energy of consciousnesses, not bodies, and not minds. God is also a consciousness, although infinitely greater than ours. And in order to fulfill what he wants from us, we just need to learn to live always in the state of subtle and pure love, and to never exit from it. God is love. He has compassion for us. He is willing to help us, guiding us all the time on the path to him, to his abode, to our ultimate happiness. But we do not go to him. Instead, we squabble for the material welfare of this world, exhaust ourselves by hating others because they get dressed, have haircuts, etc. in a different way, or because they perform prayer bodily movements different from ours, or because their skin is of a different color, or their nationality differs from ours. But God wants us to establish ourselves in the emotional state of love, and then we can get in. Every instance of leaving the state of love. Every instance of leaving the state of love results in accumulation of bad karma. God told me this once many years ago. This statement can be put as a second point right after God is love. What is meant here? Is this just another threat? Will he punish me? Will he send a dangerous illness on me? Or will he cause me to suffer during my next incarnation? No, this way of thinking is incorrect. God never punishes anyone. He teaches us. We build our destinies ourselves. For example, we ourselves postpone the happiness of meeting him, and we will continue suffering from our separateness from him as long as we do not have love within ourselves. Various misfortunes are what we attract to us ourselves. This is not God punishing us. I will give a couple of striking examples from my own life. Once I saw an illegal publication of my book about David Copperfield, which was made not only without my consent and financial calculations, but this time its content was distorted. It contained some preposterous scheme inserted in the middle on my behalf. This exhausted my patience. I exited the state of love and disposed myself to a hard conversation with the delinquent publisher. And in the evening of the same day, I got inflammation of the gullet, esophagus. Spasms were so bad that I could hardly swallow. In the morning, I could see a big black spirit, which grasped my throat, stuck to it, and would not let go, trying to strangle. I rush into the abode of the Creator, returning to the state of love, instantly recalling every instance of leaving the state of love, and the spirit disappeared. The inflammatory process was gone almost immediately. The mechanism here is the following. When we are in subtle states of the consciousness, we are out of reach of evil spirits. They are not capable of entering subtle eons. If we coarsen emotionally, then we immediately get closer to their state and become easy targets for their aggressive attacks. Almost 30 years ago, I had a much more dramatic experience. I discovered that my colleagues in Moscow in their activity suddenly started to twist into different direction behind my back. I regarded this as a betrayal of God's work by them. God himself then ordered to immediately close the spiritual center that had been created in Moscow. And that was actually all that I had to do in this situation, but I fell into a lingering state of anger towards them. And I immediately attracted devilish powers. Without any obvious occasion, I was attacked by a gang. After that, I was on the verge of death of my body for a long time, suffering from severe pain. I experienced clinical death twice, and ended up physically disabled for several years. Only a burning through of the destructed spine bones with the Kundalini energy, which I learned later, ensured an almost complete healing. In the same way, we attract either happiness or suffering for ourselves. If we enter the state of divine love, we get closer to God. We take on coarse states, then devils and demons stick on our bodies, and we become sick and suffer. This is how we punish ourselves for not complying with God's will. Jesus Christ expressed this will very clearly. Love God and love each other, regardless of anything. The opinion that God allegedly has to provide us with material welfare of various kinds is absolutely erroneous. He never promised to do this for everybody. He is not a slave to us at all. He is the Lord, the Master. He loves us and tries to help us, but to help not in procuring earthly comfort, not in satisfying our selfish desires. His love is manifested in his guiding us to our ultimate happiness in unity with him. He is the Master, the absolute Lord. We need to learn, accept, and realize his will and his law. In this case, we will live in harmony with him. This law is, the way to mergence with God is steadfast love, and whoever abandons it loses the protection of God and falls a prey to hell beings. Let us obey his will. This is in our interests, to go to God, having accepted his law. He created the entire creation and every one of us, not for our sake. This constitutes his evolution and his life, and he is going to implement his will firmly. If we want to go to him, we have to live with love and to be happy. If not, we are going to suffer in our separateness from him. Self-centeredness versus God-centeredness. It is clear that the God-centered worldview cannot become the ideology of every one of us right away. For example, just as a result of reading this book. What will be necessary is not just to think this concept over, but also to really feel God. Only then will we be able to learn to look at Earth's situations with his eyes, from his standpoint. But what we can do right now is to set attainment of God-centeredness as our goal. And we need to prepare ourselves to this by fighting against our egocentrism. Voluntary renunciation of personal pleasures for the good of other people, along with the elimination of arrogance. This is the beginning of the struggle against egocentrism. An alternative to egocentrism is true caring, that which is sensible and free from violence and rudeness. With that, the interests of others must be given higher priority over the personal interests. Taking responsibility for the well-being of other people, in the family or in any other group, is an opportunity for developing needed qualities. The leader's feeling of I must disappear and give place to the feeling of we, where there is no personal interest left whatsoever. Sexual relations are the sphere where egocentrism, as well as the absence of it, can manifest themselves in a very pronounced way. Do I act in my sexual relations out of my personal interests or out of those of my partner? This is the fundamental question that everyone should ask themselves as a part of self-analysis and self-control. Any type of violence and constraint in sexual relations is a manifestation of one's disgusting qualities. A similar situation is when a man does not take care of prevention of unwanted pregnancy of his female partner. Another example is when, after a defloration, the man proceeds with the sexual intercourse for the sake of his personal satisfaction, ignoring the pain that his beloved is experiencing. Many more examples can be given here. The behavior of many women is no less disgusting than that of many men. Now let us look at the nutritional habits. The overwhelming majority of people eat things made of corpses of animals without even bothering to think that they experienced pain and suffered, dying just for the sake of satisfaction of our cruel gustatory habits for our pleasure. People do not necessarily have to eat killed food, one that is made from meat or fish. We can get all essential nutritional elements out of plants, milk products, and eggs. Eating killed food just leads to contamination of our organisms with salts of uric acid, which causes various kinds of gout, and with coarse energies that remain in the animal corpses as a result of fear and pain that the animals experienced when dying. Eating corpses of animals is incompatible with any spiritual progress, for the ethical reasons, first of all. God has been telling people about this constantly. But now we are seeing that eating dead bodies of animals is what multiple religious pseudo-pastors demand from their followers. Otherwise, they say, you can grow proud. They should stop and realize that by doing this, they act against God and against the evolution, that they cripple the souls of people who trust them. For what God wants us to possess is love. The use of special meditative techniques can be of paramount importance in one's attempts to free oneself from the egocentric lower self. This concerns the step-by-step mastering of the total reciprocity meditation. Its essence consists in actively shifting the consciousness into the state of non-I, distributing it beyond the body, outside of it, with the vectors of attention directed towards the body. This is how just another break of egocentrism takes place, and the fundamental step is taken towards mergence with God, and towards the ability to see the Earth's situations from His standpoint, with His eyes, as it were. This is the meditative technique that allows one to attain complete mergence with Him in His abode.